Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Heisman Talk, your number one source of college football news on YouTube. I'm Nate Dogg, here with my co-host, Devin D. Jackson, bringing you the latest on what's going on in the preseason. D, good to have you back. How you been this week?
Been good, Nate, man. I'm happy to be back, and I'm ready to talk college football once again, man. I'm excited. Let's go.
Absolutely. Indeed, this is a very exciting moment, but we are 1 week away from the start of college football. This will be our last week wrapping up our series on preseason power rankings for each conference. And next week, we'll start with our game day pick'ems. So we got a lot of exciting things coming up. But in the meantime, D, I'd also like to mention, as you'll see, this new background behind me. It's empty right now, but next week it'll be filled here at the new Heisman Talk studios. So D, we've got a lot of exciting stuff up ahead. And like you said, let's jump right into it. D, last week we talked about the power rankings for the SEC conference and the Big 12 Conference. This week, we're going to discuss the Big 12 and the Pac-12. So D, today we're going to specifically discuss the Big 12 Conference. Now, we know that major changes have come this offseason with Oklahoma and Texas moving to the SEC starting in 2025, maybe as early as next year if they buy out. And with that being said, it leaves some of these other teams in limbo as to what is the Big 12 going to look like? So, D, in a lot of ways, this is the year for those teams to prove themselves as Power 5 teams, potentially even giving themselves a bid to join a new conference. With that being said, let's start off with our first team, D, who is going to be joining the SEC, and that is Oklahoma. Now, D, we know that our preseason prediction for the power rankings is Oklahoma and Iowa State in the Big 12 championship. D, what gives Oklahoma the edge over these other teams?
The reason, that we chose Oklahoma as the number one team in this conference is, just look at them. They're 56-10, since 2015 in the Big 12. And so, if you look at that and then you just see all the talent that they have and know that, with Lincoln Riley, that offense is always humming. And you have an experience now and a super athlete, well, not super athlete, but a really, really good athlete at the quarterback position. They really, really have a chance to, once again, take the Big 12. So.
Yeah, indeed. Like you said, you mentioned Spencer Rattler, and we have to wonder, is this going to be a breakout season for him? Expectations were super high coming out of high school for this kid. And really over the last year or so, he hasn't really done much. Now, obviously, he was kind of restricted to a limited schedule last year. So this year's going to give him the opportunity to really have a breakout season. And I agree. I think this kid's going to be something special. But last year he didn't live up to the expectations. So we shall see. I think, D, in a lot of ways, they're going to have to depend on a run game that they really haven't had in the past few years. When you look at transfer running back from Tennessee, Eric Gray, and with veteran running back as well, Kennedy Brooks, D, you're looking at one of the most dynamic duo running back core in the nation, possibly. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think they do have a good running back core. But I still think that, with, Spencer Rattler's talent, I still think that they're really going to still rely on the pass. I don't think Lincoln Riley is going to change up the offense much. We do know that Kennedy Brooks, rushed for 1,000 yards in 2019 before he, set out last year with COVID. But, and like you said, they're going to have a very, very talented running back group because Eric Gray, the transfer from Tennessee, is a very, athletic running back. So they're going to have a great, running back group. But I still think that, it's really going to all depend on Spencer Rattler. He had a decent season last year with, throwing for 3,000 yards and 28 touchdowns. But, he's really going to have to step it up even more and have one of those Heisman impact type of years in order to, get them to where they want to go in the national picture. But Big 12 wise, I think they'll definitely win the championship this year.
Yeah, and most experts would agree with you, D. And one thing that I'm particularly interested about is, what's this Oklahoma Sooners defense going to look like? We know their explosive offense has been there for years, but D, in the past, they've really struggled on defense, as most Big 12 teams do. It wasn't 3 years ago that they were giving up over 35, 40 points a game. They bring in a new defensive coordinator, and last year, even with a restricted schedule, like I said, averaged giving up only 17 points a game, which is huge. So, I think the Oklahoma Sooners are looking to build off of that and hopefully have another great defensive year. So, D, we know that the Oklahoma Sooners obviously are projected to win the Big 12. But D, there's a new team on the horizon. And no, it's not the Texas Longhorns. And no, it's not the Oklahoma State Cowboys. It is, in fact, the Iowa State Cyclones. And D, this team really made a name for itself over the past 2 years. And if you haven't paid much attention to them recently, you're about to find out this year what they're all about. D, just to let you know, they have three preseason All-Americans on this roster, and that's tied first for all of college football. They have, first off, Charlie Kohler, tight end. They have Mike Rose at linebacker. And to finish it off, as we all know, or who we should know, Brees Hall at running back, who's expected to have a mega year at tailback. So, D, what can you tell me about this Iowa State team and what can they do to not only get to the Big 12 championship again, but get over that hump and beat the Oklahoma Sooners and make a name for themselves?
Yeah, man. Like you said, Iowa State's definitely coming on, really, really strong. They came on strong last year, after losing that first game to Louisiana. But I think that, with Brock Purdy coming back, with Brees Hall coming back, and Charlie Kohler, like you mentioned, that offense has a chance to be really, really successful again. Man, they averaged 32 points per game last year, and I think that they can be at that point, if not even higher, just because having a full off season and not having COVID as much to deal with. I really think they can come in and really turn a few heads more than they even did last year. And their defense, they had a pretty good defense that only allowed 21 points last year. So I think that they're going to be a team to definitely be reckoned with, and I think that that offense is definitely going to have to play at a top tier level in order to knock off Oklahoma.
Yeah, I agree, D. When you look at Brock Purdy on paper, he's your typical Power 5 quarterback, in terms of size and arm strength, but he's really struggled in the turnover game in the recent years. This is one of those years for Brock, but he's really going to have to prove himself as an elite Power 5 quarterback, and also to improve his draft stock, as most likely he will be leaving after this season. So, D, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think Iowa State has a great shot. They have Mike Rose on the defensive side of the ball to lead their defense. I don't think there's much to worry about. But, if you can't put up points in the Big 12, it doesn't matter how well your defense plays. So, I mean, you're really going to have to rely on Brees Hall and Brock Purdy to carry the team, no doubt.
Definitely, man. They were kind of a Heisman talk favorite a little last year. They, talking about Brock Purdy and Brees Hall, and they came out and lost the first game. And it was just like, dang, eyes were off of them, But, this year I think they'll come out strong and, they'll be ready to play. So.
Yeah, indeed. I think that brings us into our next segment, which is a couple of the teams in the Big 12 are on the outside looking in that could really shake things up and make a trip to Jerry's World for the Big 12 championship game. And one of those teams, D, is the Texas Longhorns. Now, D, again, Texas is one of those teams who's agreed to join the SEC in 2025. But this year's a little bit different for them. They've got a new head coach in Steve Sarkisian, who we know has done a phenomenal job offensively with the Alabama Crimson Tide over the past few years with Nick Saban. Now he gets the chance to prove himself as a head coach, which changes up a little bit, a little bit things. But they have a quarterback in Hudson Card, who is a true sophomore. Didn't get much playing time behind Sam Ehlinger last year, but this is a kid that I believe is going to make a lot of noise this year, not just in the Big 12, but all around college football. I've heard many comparisons of this kid to Johnny Manziel and also his arm strength. But what are your thoughts on the Texas Longhorns and how they can have a successful season here in 2021?
Yeah, I think it'll be really, really interesting to see how Sarkisian, utilizes his talent there, in Texas and Austin, because they have a lot of talent, man. Like you mentioned, Hudson Card. When you turn on the film of Hudson Card, the high school tape, it's clear to see. He has a lot of athleticism. He can throw the ball really, really well. He was a great get for the Texas Longhorns, and we're gonna have to see how Sarkisian utilizes him. They had a very prolific offense at Alabama, and so I want to see if he can bring that offense and the efficiency that they had in Alabama, if he can bring that to the Texas Longhorns. Because if he can, with that talent that they have at Texas, they could be a sleeper and maybe knock off an Oklahoma or knock off an Iowa State. You have a really, really talented running back and Bijan Robinson, who ran for 300 yards in the final 2 games of the season last year. So, I think that they have a lot of talent on that offensive side of the ball. And notice we're not talking that much about defense because it's the Big 12. But no offense, though, no offense. But yeah, it's really important and we've seen it over the past few years. Offense is really, really important. Even more than it has been in the past. And so, you're really going to have an offense to score points, and then, your defense is just going to have to, be able to hold. And so that's kind of how the game is played now. So it's really important for Sarkisian to get off on a good footing. And so we'll see, what happens.
Yeah, and just to add, we know that Texas has had some of the top recruiting classes in the nation over the past 5-6 years, but they've never really been able to do anything, with that talent. I think Steve Sarkisian, if anyone else can do it, it's him, to be able to utilize this talent in a way that we've never seen at the University of Texas in a long time. And with that being said, I know we haven't talked much about the defense, but they have 3 transfers, most of them with veteran experience from Alabama, LSU, and Notre Dame at the linebacker position. So, that makes Texas a threat in the Big 12 as well in terms of defense. But yeah, obviously all the eyes are on Hudson Card and what Steve Sarkisian can do for that offense. And finally, we wrap it up with our last team that could make an impact, and that is the Oklahoma State Cowboys under head coach Mike Gundy. And Oklahoma State is one of those really intriguing teams this year. We know that they've had very much success in the offensive game, but Mike Gundy is one of those prolific coaches that, if the Big 12 does split, this is his year to prove himself as a head coach, maybe to get a head coaching job at a major university somewhere else. So with that being said, what can we look for the Cowboys in 2021?
Man, Oklahoma State, like you said, Mike Gundy, he always has a pretty good, team down there. Their program's a respected program. It's all going to depend on the health of Spencer Sanders, man. That the quarterback. I think everybody knows that. I don't know too much about them, so I'm going to pass that question back to you. What do you think Oklahoma State needs to do?
Yeah, and indeed, The Oklahoma State Cowboys really relied on their run game and Chuba Hubbard over the past several years. But now with the departure, they're going to have to find some young guys to make up for that. I'd also like to mention, Dee, that their defense will probably be, in my opinion, the strongest in the Big 12 as they return 9 starters from last year. So look for the Oklahoma State Cowboys to make some noise. I read in an article as well that Mike Gundy said, quote, "This is the most comfortable I've felt with a defense in my 12 to 14 years of being a head coach." So, you know, when a head coach makes that kind of statement, that's not just some kind of threat or anything. That's someone who's very confident in their defense that's hitting the field. Well, Dee, that's a wrap for today. When we come back next week, we're going to discuss the Pac-12. So get ready. Grab your surfboards because we're going to shred some waves out west. Make sure to subscribe down below. Hit the big thumbs up for this video. And make sure you turn on your bell notifications to stay notified when we post a new video each week. Get ready. College football is right around the corner. As always, this is Nate Dogg and Dee signing off.